Like nobody's talking about economic issues. Who's talking about small government? Who's talking about, stopping the government from being a predatory lender and saddling 18-year-olds with like tons of debt so that they can, give the money from the young people to college administrators? Like, who's holding back the Federal Reserve's power? Like, nobody's talking about this. I'm seeing RFK with his shirt off and he can do push-ups, and Ron DeSantis is, doing his culture war thing, and Trump is like, who's like actually caring about these foundational elements that are going to fix the structural issues? Nobody.
Hey, ColemanNators, thank you so much for joining us today. I am going to talk with our friend. She's been here once before. Anyone who's ever been here before and has not taken legal action is considered a friend. And Carol Roth is certainly such a friend. And yeah, you know what? I went back to the house to get the book because I have it. The book is not actually available until July 18th. I have it. And not only do I have it, I'm in it. Not only am I in it, the index. Carol Roth, you're here to tell us that we're going to own nothing. The book comes out July 18th. You can explain in the confines of this podcast why people need to buy the book. But if they don't buy the book, you're going to explain why they should buy the book. No, we need them to buy the book. What's going on, Carol? What's going on with the book? What's going on with did the New Economic Forum really say that? Did they didn't really say that, did they?
So the World Economic Forum put out a video.
New Economic
Forum and New World Order. I know they have you possessed because they don't want you to actually tell their plan. No, they did, Ron. They put out a video several years ago that had the top 8 predictions for 2030, and the number 1 prediction was you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. And so when I first saw it, kind of populating on social media, I figured it was wrong because so many things in social media they're out of context. And you've got this organization that is littered with the business and political elite. And I'm like, but there's no way that they're predicting the end of private property by 2030. It did not take very much research to go right to the video and go, oh yeah, okay, this is their Global Futures Councils. This is who gave the input. And then doing the research to see that it wasn't actually the first time that they had put out this messaging. It had actually come from an article that had happened a few years before the video. There was an interim article about, can you rent everything you need in your life? Like somehow your life is like going to the library every day or something like that. And it was just so staggering to me as somebody who is an advocate for wealth and seizing the American dream, to kind of think about this, because I know that wealth comes from ownership of assets that at least retain value, but hopefully appreciate in value. So when you have the global elite now talking about you will own nothing and ending private property, it ultimately translates into you not having any wealth creation opportunities. And also, throughout history, the people who haven't owned things have been very unfree and unhappy if they're even alive at the end of the day. So I didn't quite understand how that prediction all came together.
And that would be interesting enough if we were talking about what does the World Economic Forum think about things and what do they want. But as your book details in painstaking granularity, what is that this prediction is entirely consistent with lots and lots of trends in lots and lots of sectors.
It's true. It's, everybody's very focused on this number 1 prediction. The number 2 prediction is that the US will no longer be the leading global superpower or something like that. And so, you start thinking about this idea of a new world order, a new financial world order, which sounds, at its core, much like the first thing we talked about, very conspiratorial. But when you do, again, very limited research, you'll find that this is very much out in the open. If you type in Joe Biden, New World Order, you'll see that he made a speech in front of the Business Roundtable, which is the CEOs of all the major companies in the United States. And March 21st of 2022, it's on the White House's website, where he talks about the fact that the world order shifts every 3 or 4 generations. And, we had Britain and the Dutch before we were in the global pole position. And he says, there's going to be a new world order out there, and we've got to lead it.
And I won't be here to have anything to do with, in fact, I've got nothing even to do with this speech.
Well, that's the crazy part about it, right? Is like, I'm not even sure he knew what he was talking about, but somebody who wrote that speech knew what he was talking about. And when I thought it was
awesome.
It thought it was awesome. It's just saying now the quiet part aloud, like they're not even hiding it anymore. And so they put it out in the open that this is something that's happening. So I mean, just think about it, Ron. If you are part of the global elite, and as
I am, of course,
as you are, as we both are, we both are, it's Jews because we control the weather, right?
Well, all right. So on the other hand, I don't have any money. If you meant the global elite in the world of finance and wealth control, and I don't know, you must have more money than I do, but even if you don't, you have the action figure of Carol Roth, which no one has ever done, or even a Ron Coleman bobblehead. Although, but I'm still relatively young, right? Okay.
Yeah, so maybe they'll invite you to Davos. Maybe they'll invite you into some of these, elite think tanks. But, you have the global elite who see that the world financial stakes are shifting. And these aren't things that should be surprising to anybody, but we can delve deeper into our financial situation in the US if you'd like. So if you know things are moving, are you going to sit back and just go, well, I hope that works out for me? Or are you going to go, hey, we're rich and powerful, really well connected. We're going to control this to make sure that, we control as many resources as possible, that we control the outcomes, and that we do everything we can to make sure that we come out on top. And so that really is the thesis as we talk about these things that you referenced, whether it be social credit, central bank digital currencies, what the Fed has been doing to the US dollar, ESG, big tech, Wall Street competing with you to buy a home, land and water rights, et cetera, et cetera. It all kind of, in putting all of those things together, it just kept coming back to this prediction of you will own nothing. And that's why I thought it was so important to not only empower people with the knowledge, because you have to know what it is you're fighting against, but then also, obviously, where you come into the picture in our final chapter, giving people solutions on how to fight back.
Me, Ron Coleman?
You.
Oh, okay. Well, what kind of solutions have I been suggesting?
Well, we talked about particularly, I guess you remember as well as Joe Biden does. Discussions. Maybe somebody else.
No, but you stand a good shot here, reminding me of something that I actually did cognizant.
So, one of the areas that we talked about is big tech, and big tech becoming, both a de facto government and really kind of renting your life back to you as a subscription and a service. Technology used to democratize the ability for people to gain wealth and have new opportunities. But the current incarnation is one where we have very few companies with very little competition controlling key pieces of infrastructure.
And it's ironic. I mean, these are all American companies. So you might think, well, on the contrary, what these companies are demonstrating is that the U.S. will continue to be dominant if social media and big tech companies are where the future is, and if they're American-based companies. And I don't really care where their corporate headquarters is for tax purposes. I mean, that's a separate discussion. But these are fundamentally American companies. Yeah. So America good, right? This is good for America. Right.
It's good for those companies, right? So they're the ones that are collecting a fee and a tax on everything, even kind of downstream. When you go as a small business to advertise, you're paying Alphabet, Google's parent company, or Meta, Facebook's parent company, or one of these handful of companies in order to be able to reach your audience. If you have an operating system, you have two choices. You're either Android or iOS. That covers 99+% of not only the United States, but the entire world. So there aren't a lot of choices. And, we talked about, the need to have some structure over protecting our rights in this new digital world. So you had offered up, that even though we're both not generally a fan of legislation, and we would love for the tech companies to do the right thing and to step up and to have this tech bill of rights. And one of the things I thought that you said that was most prescient was like, we're going to get it wrong, but we have to start somewhere and have a workable, document that we can then modify and fix those areas we get wrong. Because if we don't, then we're in a world of hurt.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, I think it's fair to say that we need to establish that it's appropriate to try, and that it's in our national interest, by which I don't mean necessarily the interest of the state,
right,
but rather the interest of the American people, an interest that is recognized by something probably less than a majority of them right now, to treat these businesses the same way virtually every other business, especially influential businesses, are treated, which is to make sure that they don't become more powerful than the government, which purports to speak in our name. Or certainly,
let me give you some data points on that. I mean, think about just the scope of these businesses. Many of them have more users than most of the countries on Earth. Facebook has more users than China has citizens. If you think about that, the market caps of these companies, I know it's not an apples to apples comparison, but are larger than the GDP of most of the countries in the entire world. So the power that they have in terms of their user base, their citizens, and their financial wherewithal, and a very clean balance sheets. They're not in huge debt like the US government, really does make them in many ways more powerful than the government is.
This is a gigantic point, and one that I try to make as often as possible. Even libertarians acknowledge that there is rivalry among states. They'll spot you the existence of states reluctantly. Reluctantly, all right, but fine. There are such a thing as states, and indeed there are non-libertarian regimes that are hostile to as libertarian a regime as you want to have here. So how do we protect ourselves from them? So we have such a thing as a cumulative national interest. Why there's so much difficulty in libertarian circles acknowledging that you don't have to have a flag and a seat in the UN to pose the same threat to national interests as a state does. And indeed, what Google can do to affect the world and to affect our world and our lives is far more profound than what Chad or even Pakistan can really do to affect most people's lives in this country. So yes, that is, you're right. That was a good contribution by me. I deserve to be in the
and there are more that we'll get to, but I want to stay on this point because it's really important. So it's funny that you said a flag at the UN. I would offer that the UN poses as great a threat as some of the individual states that are a part of it, and some of these other organizations as well. So I think this is a tremendous point that we're unpacking here for your audience, that you don't have to be an individual actor to be a concern and a threat. Another brilliant Ron Coleman ad that we talked about is,
speaking of ads, we're going to take a break before we talk about Ron Coleman. We're going to look at this cool video that I found before on the Amazon page, which is an ad for your book.
Oh, the book trailer. It's amazing.
Yes, because why shouldn't everybody get a chance? So let me just say, I have to do a screen share. It's still, this is like your laundry list of things.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of it is that they keep saying it's a conspiracy theory, and I'm showing you headlines from like 60 Minutes and the New Yorker and basic liberal media showing you that no, it's not a conspiracy theory, and letting them tell the story in their own words, which I think is important, because a lot of the things that we're talking about, as we see here, they sound conspiracy
has become reality.
But it's it's critical to kind of, there are a lot of loony people who are talking about this, and so it's gotten to kind of the ability for them to push it aside and go, this isn't real. And so that's why I wanted to bring real thought leaders like yourselves and sourcing and whatnot to it. So one of the things that we talked about is just the concept of social credit. And right now we are living in what I would say is sort of a soft social credit regime versus China's, which has been codified at the state level. But cancel culture has sort of grown, and we have seen in recent times that they come after whether it's your social standing, which is your opportunity to get opportunities, in some cases your job, which is your path to create wealth on an ongoing basis, and in some cases your assets. I mean, think about if you didn't take the vaccine, then you lose your job, you've got wrongthink, they shut down small businesses. Our neighbors to the north in Canada, the trucker convoy, they froze assets. These are things that aren't just kind of theoretical actions and somebody trying to get you kicked off of Twitter, which for some of us actually does impair our financial opportunities, but really does come for your wealth generation. And one of the things that you had said that we kind of advise people in terms of their behaviors is, if you're working for a big company, that you need to be very careful, because you are at their whim, and that you may want to really establish yourself outside of that network and create your own network that's going to be more insular. So since this is your point, do you want to take it from there?
Well, I guess I did make that point. That does sound vaguely familiar, and it does sound like the kind of thing that I mean, what we've seen is that when people or organizations or groups of people do this, there is, if they achieve any degree of success, they are delegitimized. There's a rush to delegitimize them collectively as people who have to be either destroyed or at least cauterized away from, or there has to be
put into the underground. You have to go away, sit in the corner. You can't sit at the big table.
And it's really astonishing to me. I once represented Gab, and
okay.
Gab was at the time I they had a Nazi problem, which every social media space will have if you give them a chance. But I don't believe the people involved were lunatics. But I believe that the process by which Gab was painted as radical and friendly to, the nastier elements of our culture radicalized Andrew Torba. I really do think so. I mean, because he, either he put on a heck of a good performance, or he blew a fuse. But that actually plays into, unfortunately, given that alternate systems and alternate platforms are unlikely to ever really be impactful because of network effects. That plays right into the hands of people to say, look, they're radical, because you justify the accusations. But it was particularly meaningful to me when I think it was a point last year in 2022 when the media all decided to start attacking OAN, just as they had successfully attacked Fox when Fox was a conservative voice. And Fox chose the path of least resistance, which was to become not a conservative voice, or a much less conservative voice. This happens in every single sector. You become delegitimized, and the big problem we have, and this is kind of more my thing than your thing, is that the vast majority of people still attach tremendous significance to equity, what I call equity media brands,
Sure.
or not equity, legacy media
The big
brands.
name, yeah, the big names,
Right.
exactly.
Even though they bear no relation whatsoever to what they once stood for. But going to your book and your thesis, there's this tremendous reservoir of goodwill still in government, with the government, with the Federal Reserve, with the regulators who are here to protect us.
Mm-hmm.
Not would they all let this happen? And what I'm wondering, Carol, is it's obvious that of the two major political parties, one of them is absolutely on board with everything you're describing. And is it what it seems to be? Is it just because they're counting on being on the winning side? And I mean, do you think is there any RFK Jr. aside, or maybe not aside? What do you think is going on? I mean, I'm not sure, but there's not necessarily to absolve Republicans from this
Well,
problem.
yeah, I've described the two-party system because they are very much a duopoly in and of themselves, and there's not a lot of choice. There's sort of the illusion of choice. And, if you look at many of the problems that have been created, they've been created regardless of who's had the power position in Congress, which is, the ones who are actually supposedly making the laws. I've described it as the Democrats are the kids that if they're losing the game, they will change the rules. And the Republicans are the kids, they'll tell you that, oh, I'm so great at this game. And then when you play, they actually suck. And so I feel like the Republicans, they are really good at talking, and they don't do crap. They have no fortitude. I mean, we can look at this last debt ceiling scenario where there was actually a ton of pressure on the president to really make some reforms that, by the way, are super critical. Our financial position is a utter runaway fiscal train. We've got 125% debt to GDP on just the public level. It's completely unsustainable. We have high inflation. The government is working against what the Fed is trying to do. I mean, all these things. So here was an opportunity, and they had the cover. They could have just said, hey, the Fed is working really hard on reducing inflation, so we're doing these things to help, and we're helping out the Fed. And they could have just called it a Democratic win. But they decided not to do that, and the Republicans just caved to the whole thing. So they have shown absolutely no fortitude to do the critical things that are necessary. And all of the things that I talk about can be fixed or at least delayed pretty substantially. We can reclaim the American dream for people. But when was the last time that even amongst the candidates, nobody's talking about economic issues. Who's talking about small government? Who's talking about, stopping the government from being a predatory lender and saddling 18-year-olds with tons of debt so that they can, give the money from the young people to college administrators? Who's holding back the Federal Reserve's power? Nobody's talking about this. I'm seeing RFK with his shirt off and he can do push-ups, and Ron DeSantis is, doing his culture war thing, and Trump is who's actually caring about these foundational elements that are going to fix the structural issues? Nobody. This is a moment where we need to stand up. We need a Reagan type of leader that comes in, is respected on the world stage, and saying, we are taking back America's pole position. We're going to be there for the world. We're going to be there for our country. Here are the things we're going to do. And again, we're just getting stupidity from everyone, just this absolute, utter sideshow nonsense.
You mentioned the American dream, so I want to take a couple of minutes, believe it or not, we're starting to run out of them, to talk about
They're taking away our minutes, Ron. They won't even let us have minutes anymore.
Believe me,
it's grim. It's grim.
So the icon of the American dream, of course, is the home, the house, the single family house that everybody eventually gets to own, and eventually is becoming further and further off, or impossible for so many people. Can you, as succinctly as possible, and if you can't, then who can, explain how all these forces, why it is that my children, despite the immense amount of elite education and credentials from which they're of their parents, from which they sprung, and all the opportunities and all their brains and all their talent and good looks, why it's so hard to imagine that they're going to be able to get to own homes anywhere in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, there's a reason why the house is the symbol of the American dream, because across households, the house is actually the number one asset in terms of dollar value. So this is how families have historically created wealth. So they're very tied together. We have two things that have happened. One is on the pricing side of houses, and one is on the balance sheet of young people. And so I'm going to kind of go through each of those. So on the price of houses, we have had this ridiculous government and Fed policy that has completely inflated assets. And coming out of the Great Recession financial crisis, where everybody took too much risk, what happened? The banks got bailed out, and almost 5 million Americans lost their home to either foreclosures or short sales. So totally different outcome there. And so that meant there were too many houses on the market. There was no building. And so now we don't have enough houses on the market. So one factor, right? Too little supply. At the same time, the Federal Reserve decided that they were going to do this ridiculous suppression of interest rates and basically printing all this money and giving very cheap capital opportunities to Wall Street, to the already wealthy and connected. So they went in and they started basically bidding up the prices of all assets. Stock market got too high. And in 2010, something happened that has never happened before. And this is completely from monetary policy. There were corporations, meaningful institutional investors that got into the single family home business. And so they are now, Wall Street is now competing with you to buy a home at a level that more than 1 in every 5 homes that are sold as of the end of last year is sold to a corporation. And these corporations, they're not flipping them and making them better so that you can purchase them. They want to rent you the American dream. So they make the money and you will own nothing. And supposedly if you buy into that, it's so convenient and great for you. You're going to be happy, but you're going to have absolutely no legacy wealth. So that's the one side. It's made the houses really expensive. And oh, by the way, state, local, and federal regulations, state, local, they add almost $100,000 to the average price of the average new home that's built in this country. And obviously we know there are all these, not in my backyard kinds of laws that just make it very hard to build a house. So undersupply.
I think also that, when we think of the supply of housing, the geography,
yes.
Maybe the geography issue and the changes that globalism have at least accelerated. I'm not ready to say that they caused in middle America. You can get a house. You can get a house in suburban Cleveland.
I was going to go there too.
but you're unlikely to get a job.
Right.
So
it's a mismatch.
When we talk about the supply of housing, we're talking about housing in a place where you want to live, because which is the major, the major cities and their suburbs. Right. So that's a gigantic factor. And part of that is a result of the outsourcing of industrial capacity. Although, again, as an economics guy, it was never, competitive advantage was not competitive advantage. Comparative advantage.
Lowest cost producer.
So that's always, no one. We can't pretend that it's 1950 and we're going to create all our own things today. The world is a more complicated place, and you're not saying otherwise. But all the factors that you just mentioned make it immensely worse. It's immensely less practical and realistic to think that anybody.
So let's talk about the other piece of this. And I agree with you. There are obviously some other mismatch issues, and many government policies have exacerbated these mismatch issues. But the other side is that the government has helped destroy the personal balance sheets of young people. And you talked about it. They got in and nationalized most of student lending. And at this point, they have increased exponentially the cost of college by making all of this capital available with no bankruptcy option, no underwriting, and the colleges having no skin in the game. So the cost of college has exploded exponentially, times both the GDP as well as wage growth. So kids are paying more, but their educations aren't getting them enough to be able to make up and to be able to pay that down. So they're graduating and they're actually on an inflation adjusted basis. Their incomes are higher, but they have so much debt that they need to pay down that it really more than cancels out that increase. So that means if you have that debt load, that you're not able to make investments and you have to delay the purchases of, things like homes. In some cases, with rents going up as well from that first discussion we had, they can't even afford to rent. And now they're living with their parents again. I just did a piece for the Blaze on that. So you've got sort of this horrible scenario with college being a financial scam and government being a predatory lender, destroying balance sheets. And then at the same time, that even if they could afford it, now what they're going to purchase has become even more expensive. And it's stealing that American dream. And it's within the government's purview, right? We all know that, if they wanted more people to own homes, that they would be doing the kinds of things to create those incentives and remove those barriers. But they're the ones who are intentionally creating those barriers, because you owning nothing means that you are more dependent on them, and that secures their power at this very sort of weird time where we're at the end of a financial empire. They've got a ton of debt, and there are only so many things that they can do in order to keep themselves in power.
So what's an example of something that the federal government is doing or has done that corroborates what you just said? In other words, not what it hasn't done. I understand that the government in general is dysfunctional, but
they could get out of student lending. They could make it an underwritten process. They could allow for personal bankruptcy. They could require the colleges to own a piece of it if they want to keep their tax exempt status, so on and so forth, and completely change the scenario for young people. So we're not talking about, gifting them debt. We're talking about forcing the colleges to actually participate in a way that makes sense, and not just giving them free rein to continue to increase the prices. On the housing side, it's all about their regulations, right? As I said, $100,000 in regulations going into the price of a new home versus several years ago when it was $60,000. So maybe some of them are important. We're not saying, we want to have electricity and we don't want to have wires that, burn the house down or whatever. But I can guarantee you that you and I could go in there and, in a common sense manner, probably, get rid of at least half, if not more, of that.
There's that. And I think also, as part of that chain of pressure, cost pressure, is the college system itself, and the way the way endowment money, and to call these nonprofits is, at least in terms of the elite schools that have multi-billion-dollar, multi-tens of billions of dollars in endowment assets, and administrators who are paid seven figures of money, they're indistinguishable from any other for-profit corporation, except that there are no shareholders, which makes them immensely worse.
Yeah, I actually call Harvard a hedge fund that happens to have a university attached to it. And somebody made the point, they said, well, hedge funds pay taxes. So It's a very specially positioned hedge fund, a tax-favored hedge fund. And by the way, you've got Harvard, who has gone in and, at least as of several years ago, went into California and bought up a bunch of land for water rights. So now you've got those same people who are, getting you in this direction. Now they're getting into the financialization of water. So again, this all ties into this bigger thesis of you will own nothing, why it's just so critical to go into the information.
In order to understand this, you got to buy the book, folks. I was joking in the beginning. You're not going to get it from 45 minutes with Ron Coleman. Even when my guest is Carol Roth, who has been thinking hard about this stuff for a long time. And what do we do? We know that there are policies. What is the average, as we close, the average individual, the average person, besides buying your book and understanding the problem better?
Well, buying a hard copy, because you need to own something, you need to shift your behavior. And as we know, they're starting to change the text of books. So if you want to know what it actually says now and in the future, the hard copy, but there are behavioral changes and financial changes that kind of go along with each of the themes that we're talking about. Ron, some of your advice, is in that behavioral arena, things that we need to be doing in terms of, changing our person, where we're getting our money from, and then thinking about, fortifying our own lines of businesses, but also things like, we didn't really get into central bank digital currencies, but imagine if, there a CBDC comes into play and there's all kinds of, information and sources that says it's coming. And the Fed now has the ability to control your money at the sort of dollar by dollar level, whether you've eaten too many burgers, you said something bad on Facebook, or they're just trying to control inflation, just kill access. So have you started thinking about investing in some hard metals or doing other things in your community where you can barter and your position, so that if you are cut off from being able to use your money in the way that you have historically, what is it that you're going to do, whether that's for a period of time or for a longer period?
You're prepper, Carol. You're a prepper.
It's really weird because I've always kind of thought I wasn't going to be a prepper, but I've definitely prepper. I'm like prepared, not really a prepper, but just prepared. It's like the Boy Scouts, right? Always be prepared. Nothing bad has come from preparation. And again, it's thinking about each of these individual scenarios and making sure that whether it happens in 12 months or 12 years or 50 years, because Ron, we never know duration. That's one of the things that from finance we learn. We never know duration. There are a lot of variables that can shift. But when it does happen, that you're not just all of a sudden hearing this for the first time and going, what do I do? That you've actually thought through this and you started taking some steps, because by the time it actually is a reality, like you're not going to have the ability to then start making these plans. It's kind of like when your house is on fire. You want to have that insurance policy in place. You want to know your escape route. You don't want to start thinking about that, as you see the flames.
And in fact, I mean, you might be thinking to yourself, dear listener, well, listen, there are so many flaws and so many cracks in the foundation that this whole big system is probably going to unravel anyway. And therefore, they're not going to be able to implement their evil plans. But it's the exact opposite. COVID taught us that in times of emergency, perceived or real, or somewhere in between, that's when the state maximizes its rationalization with the help of its fellow travelers, so to speak, its dupes in the media and politics and the judiciary. Say, no, this is an emergency. It's different. The Constitution wasn't meant to apply to an emergency, when in fact, that's exactly what the Constitution is for.
Bingo.
Carol, fantastic. We really could. We should, we should just do like a 4-hour live stream on this or something. Seriously, think about it. We should do, because there's not only are there an immense amount of topics in this book, but no one is better qualified to discuss them with you than I am. All right, okay. No one is prepared to spend 4 hours. Just buy the book, buy it in hard copy, buy the hardcover too, by the way. Return with a V, okay? Hard copy. I'm in it.
Multiple times, and in the index.
Carol, thanks so much. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you. Thanks again for sharing your knowledge so generously. It's much appreciated, and you're going to help lots of people.